All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Upleveling Leadership Preparation and Development. This is the finale series. I am Dr. Vernita Glenn White, and thank you so much for joining me. I don't think I've said this on the other series, but I found this term coach sultan. So I am your brilliant coach sultan. And I don't mean brilliant from an egotistical standpoint. I mean brilliant as in allowing my light to shine so I can illuminate your light so you can also shine, especially as a leader, or if you consider yourself just a person in a leadership role. Either way, you have brilliance to be let out. And this is a great way to start doing that. So in the coach sultan, meaning combining both the art of coaching and the art of consulting together. Just like there's an art and science to teaching, there's an art and science to leadership. Everything pretty much has an art and a science to it. So I love blending multiple things together. And that's how we ended up with this process that we're talking about. If you don't know, if you jumped and you missed everything, this is part of my dissertation that I did back in 2015. And I know that we are years out at the time of this recording, but it is still relevant in the fact that there's been a huge shift, and not just this year recently, but over the years, where the concept of STEM education or STEM leadership or preparing students for STEM careers have been a big push. And I believe that STEM has become just a buzzword, to get people like, oh yeah, throw money to this and let's do trainings on that. And the concept of STEM is not new. It is, I was in a quote unquote STEM magnet program before there was STEM. It was just EST, engineering, science and technology. But STEM has become a buzzword. And I think there's a group of people who are left out of the preparation and development of what it means to create these STEM pathways for students. And that's the leaders. Teachers are getting better support with a lot of professional development that's coming around. But I think with leadership, people overlook that crowd, or maybe a lot of leaders are opting out. I don't know. I'm going on the side of there's not a lot available for leaders in this particular space, aside from going back to school to get another like full-on degree. And we know that although education is slow to change, traditional education is slow to change, the society and technology moves at a rapid pace. So you're in school, and by the time you finish your degree, it's like, okay, we're on to the next thing, and you're constantly catching up. So as I said before, this study was just focusing on mathematics education, what leaders attend to in the instructional environment. I guess we can move on to the introduction part. What leaders attend to in the instructional environment when they're observing classrooms, when they're doing evaluations and providing feedback. I love the coaching cycle. I think feedback is important and necessary, but that feedback needs to be relevant in the way that moves the teacher forward, elevates the teacher, specifically in a content area, especially if we're talking about growing our students, preparing our students for career fields. But it's like, you want to prepare them for something, but how are you preparing them for something you've never experienced? And I'm not saying that you have to be I'm an engineer or a scientist or a mathematician or a medical doctor, anything in those careers to be a great teacher or a leader. But I do believe that there's a certain skill set and a certain language that needs to be developed or for you to take on to make sure you're having those strategic conversations. So yes, do you have to be a medical, this is me personally, do you have to be a medical doctor to understand how to look at curriculum that will help enhance the quality of a medical program? Not necessarily, but do you need to understand what all goes into preparing a doctor, what courses a doctor needs to take, what happens when they're outside of school? What does it look like in the field? And how can you bring some of those real life field experience into the curriculum and things like that? How are you going to work with the professors or the teachers who are teaching those courses to make sure that, because they're the content experts, so making sure that they're on top of their game, so they're delivering that high quality instruction. That's what I think is important. And so, as said this before, you will hear me just only talk about like mathematics, but as you'll see at the end of this, when I get into the recommendations and everything, this can be for any content area. It's called, you'll hear me talk about leadership profile and the tools that we use, but it really can go for any content area if you understand what to look for, if you understand standards, if you understand student moves, and if you understand your role as a leadership in any content area. So I can do this in English language arts, I can do this in social studies, I can do this in science, but at the time of this study, this was particularly for mathematics. Going back to what I said, that STEM is a buzzword, I think people are misunderstanding what STEM education is. And it's different from if I only talked about mathematics education. And I can say that for another day. So when I say insert STEM content here, I'm really coming from a perspective of engineering design and the thought process of how to approach certain problems and situations. So not just the content itself, because when people think about science, technology, engineering, mathematics, they think about a science class, they think about a technology class, they think about an engineering class, and they think about a mathematics class. But putting all of that together is really a mindset and a framework and a way of thinking about how to approach problems. And I think when people hear it that way, it's like, oh, this isn't that complex. Not at all. Now, the individual content areas could be complex, but when you think about STEM, that's, in my opinion, and in my research, that is not what it is. So again, this is about mathematics. I am happy to talk about any content or subject area outside of this series to show you how this all fits and works, because I do know that there are leaders, like one year you may be observing a mathematics department, another year you may be observing a social studies department, or you may be over the whole entire like facilities, but guess what? They have standards and things as well, and this applies. All right, so this is our finale. We're going to get into the analysis, the culmination, like what happened. So I gave you in part one was really about the introduction. Part two, and the introduction and the purpose and the problem that we're trying to solve. And this is more like a podcast. It is on video form. I do see the slides here. If you don't see the slides, you can just listen to the audio. It is a form like a podcast because I do read parts of the dissertation because I do educate at heart, lay the groundwork, lay the foundation. So people will know that I just didn't pull this out of the hat somewhere. This was years and years of research prior to what I did, and years and years of research to where I had to go deep into what was happening, and then either prove it right, prove it wrong, or build upon it. The second part of this series was literally reading a lot of that research and laying the groundwork for the different frameworks and things that I developed to do this study. And then the third part, part three of the series, was talking about more of that framework and that conceptual framework that I developed of the leadership profile, understanding the knowledge of content in students, and the concept of noticing, and then the standards for mathematical practices. And what does it look like for a student to have mathematical thinking? So I put all of those together so that you will understand the framework and the groundwork, I should say, of why is this important. And I think a lot of times when we see professional developments, or we see new services or concepts or strategies, it's like, well, where does this come from? And I don't think a lot of people take the time to understand where things come from and where they develop. And when you don't do that, it's easy to take a lot of things out of context. I also talked about building up, looking at those leadership standards and why that was still important. So not dismissing anything that the leadership preparation programs do, but incorporating well, I don't say, but also incorporating parts of where we can enhance that for the leaders or aspiring leaders or emerging, or however you want to name them. So we're going to talk about the analysis, and this is going back over everything I just talked about. It says the purpose of this study was to understand what administrators attend to during instruction and how what they notice influences their ability to identify the Common Core state standards for mathematical practices. Pause. When you hear me say Common Core, remember this study was done in 2015. I entered my program in 2012. Common Core state standards were pushed out in 2010. So it was still relevant at this time. And even though there are a lot of states that are, I think they were dismissed or not using Common Core, just insert your state standards here. I don't care if people say, we don't believe in Common Core, that's fine, but your state or your district, they do follow a series of standards. I know my state where I am, they're like, we don't do Common Core, but when you look at the standards, I'm like, you do realize you just changed the name. But hey, that's neither here nor there. I'm not in that fight, but the concept of standards. So don't tune out when you hear me say Common Core, just insert your state standards there for whatever content area you're focusing on. Okay, the primary research methods for this study were qualitative, where data were collected using Think Aloud protocol analysis, video and audio recording, and observational notes using audio note. Additional qualitative and quantitative data were collected using the Leadership Profile Survey and the S&P identification tool to aid in the sample selection, categorization of administrators, and analysis of the data across the sample. Individual case study techniques were used to conduct the preliminary analysis of the participants. And then I did the descriptions of the different levels. So I do have names for the levels, but not to confuse you, I'll just say level 1, level 2, and level 3. So at level 1, the participants in this category, they made general references to the mathematics. Comments reflected back or repeated the mathematics mentioned in the lesson. Comments tended to either be quite general about mathematics, or they use the same words as those that appear in the lesson. So that was the level 1 of where the administrator was paying attention to when they were observing the classrooms. Level 2, participants' comments about the mathematics did more than reflect back the lesson. Participants used their own words to describe what occurred mathematically. While references were made about the mathematical thinking of the students or teacher, the participants may not have provided detail about the statements they made. So that was level 2 of what they noticed during the classroom observations. And then level 3, participants' comments reflected an understanding of the mathematics with attention to how the teacher and students interacted with the mathematics during the instruction. The participant also made conjectures about the thinking of the students and/or teacher and provided a rationale. Lastly, in the process of describing the mathematics, the participant may have made comments about the nuances of teaching it, the challenges of learning it, and possible misconceptions. That was the highest level of where the leader could be as far as the leadership profile. And just to jog your memory, if you did not remember going back to the other series, and mainly in part 3 where I laid this out, the leadership profile survey comprised of where they saw themselves on. I did a scale on using the state standards for leadership. What were their beliefs about that? What were their interpretations about those? I did beliefs about mathematics. I asked them about their background in mathematics, their observation experience. I asked them to look at classroom scenarios, like read them and write out what they saw in those classroom scenarios. And so what else? Oh yeah, I did say their beliefs about, the beliefs about students in mathematics, their beliefs about teaching mathematics, because those are 2 different things. And then of course their beliefs about leadership, and then their understanding of the leadership standards. I did all of that and compiled them together to put them in these different categories. So that's what the leadership profile is. So it wasn't just, so when I say profile, it was like everything that I could think of from a 360-degree angle. So I'll give you a background of the types of administrators that went through this particular study. So some of them were district level administrators between 4 and 9 years, and some of them taught social studies for less than 3 years. They've had experience observing K-12 mathematics, English language arts, reading, science, and social studies. A few of them taught middle school and high school English language arts and electives between 3 and 5 years. Some were deans of schools for less than 2 years before they moved up into the role of assistant principal. And then some of them had experience observing middle school mathematics or grades 6 through 8 mathematics, science classrooms, and electives. There were some that taught English language arts between 10 and 20 years. And then some of them had been a district level administrator for less than 2 years. And they've had experience teaching elementary, so starting at grade 3 to 12th grade mathematics, English language arts, social studies, and foreign language classrooms. There were some who they taught middle school and high school mathematics between 3 and 9 years. And then some of them served as assistant principals for 10 years or more. And then in those 10 years, they've had the opportunity to observe K through 12 mathematics, reading, science, social studies, foreign language, and electives. And then there were some who were, they were deans. So deans are, if you don't have deans, they're like administrators, but in some states, they're still teachers. If you look at the scale, some are on the administrative scale. A lot of them deal with behaviors or discipline or, well, those are the deans that I know. I think in one district where I know that was different, they do some things like curriculum, like you have to be a dean before you can be considered a principal or something like that. So deans have different meanings for everyone. But here, our deans were mainly on behavior, discipline, maybe some content stuff, but very rare. And they've had experience in all of the subject areas at the K-12 level. And then there were some that they were already teaching, they went into the administrator role all the way up to principal, but then some of them decided, you know what, this is not for me. They went back to teach some hard sciences like physics and chemistry and things like that. So I wanted to share that background of the types of people that were in this study. So very quickly, I am going to talk to you about what was happening. Let's see, are we here yet? I think I did that, excuse me. I get so caught up in like explaining things. I did do that, my apologies. So I talked to you about the classroom reflections. That was where the leadership profiles were. The classroom videos were that we use the Think Aloud protocols. We use videos from Inside Mathematics. Again, I wanted to use something that was the same thing across the board. And I know that there are a lot of variables in classrooms, but these videos I like because they were real students. They were real teachers at the time, and they had already been vetted through like series of foundations. So, and I watched them myself. I had raters in there, so you can go back to part 3 so you can understand what I was talking about and why those videos are important. I did the recap for you. So my apologies for not advancing the slides, but you know, so you understand what I was saying. So going back from the research questions, and the question for the first one was, how do administrators' leadership profile relate to what they notice in the instructional environment? And then it says administrators in level 1 notice the teacher's use of instruction and classroom discourse between teachers and students and demonstrated little knowledge and attention to student learning as it related to content. The administrators in level 2 notice student engagement, attention to academic vocabulary, and teacher instructional strategies. And participants in level 3 notice how students were interacting with the mathematics. The students attempt to use academic language, teacher instructional strategies, and the use of formative assessments. Although it appeared that members of each group attended to the same aspects of the instructional environment, it is important to note that the administrators' attention to detail were varied based on what they noticed. I provided support for this answer and discussing each group across the videos. So supporting data for that. So remember, the question was, how do administrators' leadership profiles relate to what they notice in the instructional environment? So I said the analysis of the transcripts revealed that as a group, majority of the level 1 members attended more to the teacher in the first video and slowly transitioned to the students in the second video. Statements about the teacher and students pertain to the reasoning of students, their problem-solving skills, and how they had to make sense of the mathematics that occurred. However, the observation of those behaviors were infrequent. They often noticed how the teachers questioned the students, the behaviors of the students, and noted that the teacher repeatedly called upon the same students to answer questions or make a comment. This whole group had a level, in the level 1, their statements mainly focused on the teacher's use of instruction, classroom discourse between teachers and students, and demonstrated little knowledge or attention to student learning. Select phrases with most attention to mathematics, students, and teacher behaviors were provided from each member of this group to demonstrate what the participants noticed. So I'll spare you the details because I literally went like participant by participant and what they said, interview by interview by interview going through, but I'll give you the high level approach. So we talked about teacher questioning. They were noticing, so teacher questioning, let's see, majority of their comments were based on what the teachers were doing and how the teacher was saying certain questions, like whether it was too slow or too fast. There was some attention to student behavior. Well, there was a lot of attention to student behavior and the interactions during instruction. So the members of that group noticed that students, so this is group 1, noticed that students were, noticed what students were doing in each lesson, but only restated what occurred. A majority of their statements attended to the students' behavior within the classroom. So if they saw a student sort cards and pass them out to their group members, and what they were thinking and what they noticed, they were like, oh yeah, I saw the students sort cards and pass them out to their group members. So just restating what was happening in the video. Another part that they were focusing on was compliance and management. So the members in this group had the least administrative experiences at the school level compared to the other participants. Yet it was evident that their leadership lens dominated what they noticed during the classroom videos. So I'm not saying that one or the other is bad, but that's why it was important to build a leadership profile so you have a starting point, right? Another section was knowledge of content of students. So this category refers to being aware of the content and also noticing specific things about the students that related to their understanding of mathematics. So some of them were closest to noticing the knowledge of content in the students as it related to expressions and equations. And that was one of the videos that was showed to them. And I also said the statements about what the members and the level 2 group noticed suggest that they primarily attended to the general behaviors of the students and teacher with limited attention to the mathematics or students' thinking. A few statements related to instructional leadership, but they did not consider the specific context of the classroom or how these teachers' behaviors may be affecting students' thinking. The next part, and we get into level 3. Oh, my apologies, that was level 2. So then we get into level 3. The analysis of the transcripts revealed that each member of the level 3's cognitive thought process revealed their understanding of mathematics. Several of their statements from the Think Aloud protocol were based on the students' interaction with the teacher and with the content, in addition to the teacher's questioning strategies. While the members of this group, no, I was right, that was level 1. This is level, yeah. While the members of this group focused on teachers and students, they also noticed how the teachers and students were responding to the mathematics, which was different from the previous group. So a few things that the members in this group and their statements also revealed their thoughts about student engagement, attention to academic vocabulary, and teacher strategies. Neither member of this group hesitated to express their thoughts during the Think Aloud protocol, which might have implied they were comfortable with talking aloud. So to go back, if you did not hear from part 3, the Think Aloud protocol is where you are literally saying what you're seeing in real time. The premise of this study was that there's something that changes from what the administrator sees to what they write. So I wanted to get what they are actually seeing so that there was no delay in the information that's coming out. And that was taken like from medical fields. They do that a lot. So in this group, they content focused on the teacher strategy. So in both the videos, they notice how the teacher questioned the students and the behaviors of the teachers during instruction. A majority of these comments restated what occurred in the videos, but they illustrate their attention to the mathematics. In the area of knowledge of content of students, the members noticed how students were attempting to understand expressions and equations and noted their process in doing so. They made references to the mathematics, but did not offer additional explanations as to why the students were responding this way. So I'm not giving you like everything that they said. I just wanted to give you a high level overview of the data that supported that research question. When it came to compliance and management, the participants in this group made comments that illustrated their leadership backgrounds. Their attention to what the teacher did and what the teacher should have done demonstrated their view at their level 2 view. No, yeah. So I'm getting, this sounds like I was getting confused because I have them named here, but I'm calling them levels so not to confuse you and to confuse myself, but it's okay. As it relates to instructional leadership, content, students, and the teachers, their comments were general overall, but illustrated their attention to mathematics. So in that group, remember, they have leadership expertise, they have experience with mathematics. So they're able to talk about all the general things that happens in the classroom, but they're comfortable enough to call out things that are happening in the as it related to mathematics. They don't go into detail, but at least they're paying attention to it. In the first group, it's like, yeah, I know I'm in a mathematics classroom, but I'm not going to talk about anything that's happening in mathematics, if that makes sense. It says the analysis from this group revealed that the participants' mathematics and leadership background influenced what they noticed about the teachers, students, and content throughout the lessons. Although the participants were more vocal in their instructional leadership comments, they had multiple instances where they noticed the mathematics and often used their own words to describe what occurred. This group noticed how the students used the visual models of expressions, equations, and inequalities to help them understand the features and relationships between them. The members of this group also attended to how students were engaged in discussions amongst each other while using proper academic vocabulary. The statements verbalized by the members of this group were consistent with this view, where the participants did more than reflect back to the lesson and use their own words to describe what occurred mathematically. Although references were made about mathematical thinking of the students or teachers, the participants did not provide detail about the statement. So now we get to level 3. My apologies, I wrote it wrong in my notes. So this is level 3. So in this level, the transcripts revealed that the participants in this group had an understanding of how the students and teachers process the mathematics in each lessons. They were able to unpack how and why the teachers were questioning the students and notice where students might have been frustrated as each lesson continued. Now, this was interesting because when some of the participants in this group, they rated themselves as like level 1 or level 2 for their knowledge of instructional leadership. However, they were able to think deeply about the relationships among the teachers, students, and mathematics. So yes, self-perception, that was part of the study, but then that's why you do multiple data points, because like, okay, you may have said this, but how you're acting is above what you've rated yourself. So in this group, when it talks about the attention to the teacher instructional strategies, the participants in this group notice how the teacher created a learning environment for the students and how the teachers questioned them about their thinking. Although the participants in this group thoughts involving the teacher were general and focused on teacher behaviors that occurred throughout each video, they did involve mathematical language. The participants verbalized their own thoughts that extended beyond what they saw in the videos, which might suggest that they're very comfortable with the Think Aloud protocol. They were also so some of them in this group, they were also the ones who speak in like first person. And I thought that was unique as well. So then they only selected phrases with the most attention to the mathematics, the students and teacher behaviors, which were chosen from each member of the group that demonstrated what they noticed. In the area of knowledge and content and student inquiry, a majority of the participants in this group's verbalizations attended to the students in both videos. This was consistent with the way they viewed the mathematics in use. Their attention was focused on how the students learned and how they interacted with the mathematics. The participants were placed in this category alone because they noted how the students might have been frustrated by the teacher's questioning strategies and attempts at what they call discovery learning. During the Think Aloud protocol, the participants provided evidence as to why they made certain statements. They did not explain their thinking, rather it was an extension of the original thought. That was something I was clear about in the protocol. I don't want to know why you said what you said, right? You don't have to explain anything to me. I want the raw data. So it was important that I said that, because if anyone would listen to it or read it, they would think that he was explaining, but he wasn't. He caught himself just to extend his thought. So a lot of times translations and meaning can get lost in an explanation, and I didn't want them to explain or make them think that what they were saying was wrong. So attention to the use of assessment. So not everyone saw this, but only certain members in this last level, this higher level, saw this. So although the participants in this group attention mainly focused on the students and what teachers could do to better assist students throughout the lesson, they briefly shifted to addressing how assessments could be used during instruction to drive what the students were learning. Overall, the participants in this group were attentive to student thinking and how the teachers were responsible for facilitating the learning environment. Their statements provided details about how the students might be making sense about mathematics and shared their thoughts about discovery learning. They noticed the importance of students understanding the goal of the lesson, how students were thinking differently about abstract situations, and how the students were able to communicate and share their ideas with each other. So their backgrounds, that played a lot into what they were noticing. And that's why it was important for me to build that profile, because I wanted to know, like, what is your background in mathematics? Was your last time taking mathematics like when you were in high school, or that very entry level in college? And although I did not go into detail about the types of courses they took in college based on what their majors were, I knew that some of them had very limited experiences with mathematics at the collegiate level, and they did not take like advanced classes and mathematics classes while they were in high school. So the summary of this were, again, the research question was, how do administrators' leadership profile relate to what they notice in the instructional environment? To answer this question, the participants with varied administrative experiences and views about mathematics and use were asked to think aloud while watching 2 mathematics instruction videos. And I tell you what those titles are. And then I said the analysis of administrators' interpretations of mathematics instruction generated key findings that included differences in what they noticed about students, teachers, mathematics content, and instructional leadership. These findings were related to the amount of mathematics each administrator noticed in the instructional environment. Okay. So then moving on to research question number 2, and that question was, how does what the administrators notice in the instructional environment relate to their ability to identify students engaging in appropriate standards for mathematical practice? If you're not familiar with mathematical practice, there are 8 of them. I talk about them in part 2, I believe, and I may go over them again in part 3, but definitely in part 2, I talk about them and give you an explanation of them. They're not really like standards, like content standards, but it is a way of thinking and approaching mathematics. I personally think they can be used across any content area, but again, for the sake of this study, we're talking about mathematics, but it's not a concept like, okay, what am I learning for addition or geometry? What are the standards for that? It's just a way of thinking and approaching problems. All right, so this analysis demonstrated what the mathematical language of the participants and attention to how students interacted with the content increased when the administrators were presented with the standards for mathematical practice identification form during the S&P's follow-up interview. Again, in part 3, I talked about, I allowed them to do the Think Aloud protocol, observe the videos, I got that. And then what administrators normally do is provide feedback for the teachers during the post-observation conference, or they just send them the feedback. Well, I wanted to support their feedback by giving them a tool with the standards for mathematical practices on them, with the teacher look fors, the student look fors, and the actions of the teacher and students. Because again, relevant feedback is good, but relevant, meaningful feedback is what moves people forward. So this is to show that the administrator really doesn't need to be the content expert. They just need to have the right language to get the questions out or the responses from the teachers who are the content experts. All right, so what did I say? I'll read that again. So the analysis demonstrated what the mathematical language of the participants and attention to how students interacted with the content increased when the administrators were presented with the standards for mathematical practice identification form during the S&P's follow-up. With the aid of the S&P's identification tool, the administrators as a whole were able to accurately select a majority of the standards for mathematical practice that were listed for each video, according to what we discussed from the raters and from Inside Mathematics. I supported this answer by discussing the classroom videos separately while maintaining the structure of each group. And I was just telling you how I broke that down in my study. I don't need to go through all of those different things, but it was interesting that as they were talking, what they were noticing, it was like, okay, I can see that. But when I gave them a supporting tool, they were able to say, oh, let me laser this in. So again, research question 2 asks, how does what administrators notice in the instructional environment relate to their ability to identify students engaging in appropriate standards for mathematical practice? This analysis demonstrated that the mathematical language of the participants and attention to how students interacted with the content increased when participants were presented with the S&P's identification tool during the S&P's follow-up interview. From the Think Aloud protocol, each of the participants noticed aspects of instructional leadership, student thinking and engagement, teacher instructional practices, and mathematical content. The administrators were able to use what they noticed as a reference when selecting the standards for mathematical practice they thought were the focus of each lesson. That was important because, again, we don't want to throw away what they noticed, but we want to give supporting details and information and facts to what they noticed. Let's see. Okay. So that was a high level view of the analysis, and then I get to the ending of this study. So the purpose of the study was to understand what administrators attend to during the instruction and how what they notice influenced their ability to identify the Common Core State standards for mathematical practice. This study represents an examination of the theory of leadership content knowledge, the concept of noticing, and the concept of knowledge of content and students. Now, this was research that was done as early as 2000, right? So it's not new. This is important to know that none of this is new, but I don't think a lot of people have paid attention to this, especially in a lot of leadership preparation and development programs. The primary research methods for the study were qualitative, though quantitative data were used. The qualitative data were collected using the Think Aloud protocol, the videos, and I tell you all of those things right there. All of these methods aided in sample selection, the categorization. So, just talking about just how we're being very strategic and setting up the different levels for the participants to be in. So then we talk about the comparison or the contradictions or, in the studies. And that's also important. So when you're doing things or trying to find like people to work with you, consultant services, programs, it's like, how does this work? Why does this work? what does additional research say about it? And then what does, how is your research different? And not that saying that anything is right or wrong, but it's good to know that where it works and where it doesn't work, or what was tried and what wasn't tried. So these findings confirm several issues already identified in the literature that suggest that administrators notice pedagogical practices of the teacher during instruction. The administrators in this current study noticed teacher questioning how the teacher calls on the same student and how the teachers were making the students explain their answers. They also noted that the students' behaviors, such as raising their hands and some interaction between the students and the content, and these studies were similar to other studies. These findings were similar to other studies. There were some earlier studies from between 2008 and 2011 that examined the role of administrators during classroom observations and the observations of mathematics instruction. An example of examining the administrators noticing during mathematics instruction was provided by Nelson and Sassi in 2000, where they found that although the initial focus during classroom observations of their 24 participants were on general pedagogical practices, by the end of a year-long professional development involving classroom videos, the administrators attended to how mathematics was learned, the nature of the student engagement, and aspects of the mathematical knowledge. The participants in this study were able to view the videos at separate times, once at the beginning and once at the end of the study. The teacher supervision seminars involved, and not my study, the same study in 2000. The teacher supervision seminars involved learning about mathematics education reforms and how classrooms that implement tenets of such reforms may look differently from what is considered a traditional classroom. During the first viewing, the administrators noticed what they felt was important during instruction, such as wait time, number of student responses, and teachers' ability to gauge student understanding. Nelson and Sassi confirmed the importance of these aspects during teaching and learning, but emphasized that this was not sufficient. So by conclusion of the study, a few participants began noticing how students were provided with the opportunity to think and talk about mathematical ideas. Then I talk about, some other studies to build upon that. I will spare you some of those, but I will say at the end of this, the key finding from the identification of the standards for mathematical practice relates to the educational leadership literature, which has examined the administrator's role as instructional leaders and how they use the data gathered from classroom observations to make decisions about teacher effectiveness and student engagement. One method of collecting data from classroom observation is through the use of protocols, rubrics, or checklists with predetermined look-fors describing teacher questioning techniques, teacher moves, and classroom environment, which also includes ensuring that equity is present during instruction. And Marzano, Danielson, Gertz, NCTM, Dweck, and Good, Gordon, Ng, several researchers were behind this. The administrators in this current study were familiar and with similar observation tools. Again, I didn't want to change too much. I just wanted to enhance what they were already used to. Unlike these tools, which involve general pedagogical practices and characteristics of student behaviors, the tools used by the administrators in my study included content-specific actions of both teachers and students that align to the standards for mathematical practice. Although the language of the administrators were describing what they noticed during the Think Aloud protocol pertained to the characteristics of the SMPs, the data suggested that there was an increase in mathematical language and attention to how students interacted with the content when presented with the identification tool. This is similar to Cobb and Will in 2003, described as boundary objects, which are tools like pacing guides or rubrics that may have different meanings in different communities of practice, such as teachers and administrators, but are used to bridge the gap between different point of views and context. The data suggests that the use of the SMP's identification tool did not change the focus of what administrators noticed in the classroom videos, but it served as a tool to give reason for the decisions they made regarding the SMPs, which SMPs were the focus of each classroom. That was important because in a lot of the other studies, I spared you some of the details. Some of the concerns were, well, if you tell them what to look for, then they're not gonna treat the classroom observation like it's real. It's going to change the meaning of the classroom observation. And what I set out to prove or disagree with was that that's not true. Because they saw something, it doesn't leave their mind. They're still going to use that, but the tools just enhance what they noticed, and it gave context. So the implications, the study has important implications for educators who teach or conduct professional development for current administrators. Hence why this entire series was up-level leadership training, preparation, and development. It is important to understand that administrators might have general ideas of what student engagement in mathematics classroom might look like. Therefore, an assessment of how administrators view mathematics in use, and again, we can use STEM concepts, I should say, because STEM is not like a class, but STEM concepts or the design model or instructional model or insert content may be needed to interpret their level understanding about mathematical thinking of students. This research study suggests that the role of administrator as an instructional leader is most beneficial when he or she or they has an understanding of mathematics teaching and learning and content and knowledge of content and students. Although the administrators in this study might not have identified every correct S&P for each video, or perhaps they interpreted the meaning of a practice incorrectly, they were able to use occurrences within the videos to support their decisions. Again, decisions are important. This might imply two things. Either administrators notice how students are thinking and interacting with the mathematics during instruction, but attempt to separate the content based on what they might have learned to be the best instructional practices when making decisions about teacher effectiveness, or regardless of subject matter teaching experience, when an administrator is provided with a tool similar to the S&P's identification tool, their understanding of standards-based instruction and instructional leadership might allow them to make inferences about the S&Ps as they relate to the content and student achievement. This could not be determined based on the current sample size. So I would have needed like thousands of administrators, and that is my hope during like some of this work that I'm putting out, that while I am doing the work to support students, we can also add to the research with a larger sample size. Nonetheless, administrators require training that will provide them with skills to look beyond surface level best practices and focus on how teachers are ensuring that their students are meeting the rigor of the content standards through the use of the standards for mathematical practice. Such training may involve similar practices related to think aloud type protocols or reflections about classroom scenarios where the administrator's response could be used to develop differentiated mathematics in use instruction or insert content. The data suggested that it is important to understand administrators' views of mathematics in use and what they initially attend to in the classroom observations. So again, I'll just read the limitations. With the interesting findings from the study, it is important not to overlook the limitations of this research. That's just being honest. I'm not saying that this is a cure-all for everything, a fix-all, like a one-size-fits-all model or one solution fits all. Totally not true. So first, the study involves analytic generalization, where attempted to link the findings of focusing on cognitive process of administrators during the Think Aloud protocol to the theories of leadership content knowledge and the concepts of noticing and knowledge of content in students as it pertains to the standards for mathematical practice. These results could not be generalized to the broader population of administrators. The reason being, so let me explain that. So because I used something like the Think Aloud to where it was the administrator and it depended on what that particular administrator said, I can't say, or it's not right for me to say, well, this particular administrator, because if someone had their similar profile, they're going to think the same way. Or all of the administrators who fit this profile, this is how they're going to see the mathematics classroom or how they're going to view STEM education. That's not true, because it was, like I said, it was the cognitive process of a person. You can't just take a cognitive process and put it on somebody else, right? So then second, due to the limited empirical research on the standards for mathematical practice, there was not a wide range of classroom videos that included segments or full videos of actual mathematics teachers teaching unscripted lessons. With the use of classroom videos in the current study, there was always an underlying notion from the administrators that the students and teachers were behaving differently due to the presence of classrooms due to the presence of cameras in the classrooms. So, and I know this from experience that when a teacher teaches well and they're doing their thing, it doesn't matter if the cameras were in the classrooms or not. These were vetted, and you can see where these students were real. So these videos were like the students were used to the camera. So this wasn't like day 1 or week 2. It was like, all right, we know the routine. Now we're back to normal kind of thing. Also, it wasn't like I had a whole a plethora, I should say, of videos to use. And it was important to say not scripted, because there were a lot of videos out there to where this is what this S&P 1 looks like, or this is what S&P 5 looks like, and I'm going to teach this lesson. And it was like, it wasn't that it was bad. It was great for modeling purposes, but it wasn't realistic for the administrators to feel like they were in their normal environment. So I hope that makes sense. The third limitation, the leadership profile survey involved a self-assessment of the participants' instructional leadership knowledge and their reflections into classroom scenarios, which might illustrate that self-assessments are not valid. Hence, the measure of the LPS presented another limitation. So yes, I do believe, and I told them to, and I can only say what I said to them, like, be honest, you're not getting graded for this. This is not going back to your district to say that you're not qualified to be an administrator or to be over a mathematics classroom. So I don't know that eased them to tell the truth, but I think it did, because it was, they're always thinking that they're being evaluated. And anytime you have a researcher coming in and say, I want to use you for my study, it is easy to be like, well, I want to make sure you look good, or I want to make sure I look good, or I don't want to be made wrong. So I try to ease that as much as possible, but again, it's still a self-assessment. Next, the use of the Think Aloud protocol provided raw data and access to the administrator's thinking while the participants were watching the classroom videos. But it was difficult to generalize how the administrators would perform when watching different levels of mathematics instruction. Subsequently, amongst the administrators that participated in the study, there was not sufficient differentiation between the sample regarding the years of mathematics teaching experience, range in administrative experiences, or the levels of administration, such as current assistant principals, superintendents, and so forth at the time of the study. However, a few of the participants had previously served in those roles. Finally, the characterization of this small sample size produced an unequal number of administrators in each of the groups, limiting the data with different views of mathematics in use. Now, I do still believe in the work of this study, but to be a responsible researcher, it's not fair to say that this will work for everyone. And that's why I believe that understanding the whole person and their beliefs and their values and their background, I do believe that's important when you are doing any type of consulting or coaching, especially in an area where people may not feel as comfortable like mathematics, right? So moving forward, what does all of this mean, right? So future research is needed in various areas. Of course, there's always research to be done. An examination of what administrators attend to in the instructional environment of a high school mathematics course as it pertains to the content and the standards for mathematical practice might produce interesting key findings. Again, this was high-level elementary and middle school videos that I used. Given the various mathematics courses offered in a high school, it may be worth conducting the Think Aloud protocol within each area and examining how administrators identify the S&Ps. Next, it will be interesting to conduct Think Aloud protocols with mathematics instruction using Skype or FaceTime, because we are in the digital age. And see, I was thinking that well before the situation that we're in. The use of technology and virtual observations might provide insight into how administrators are thinking and what they're noticing in real time. Fast forward, this is still definitely needed. And although there are a lot of schools that are back to being face-to-face, there's still an element of being in the virtual space. And how do we support those educators who started off in the virtual space even before the global pandemic? So virtual education is not new, right? It just became more wide scale, but it's not new. And so I know that there's still a group of educators who are looking for ways to enhance their digital learning and instruction. So in addition to real-time classrooms, it might be beneficial for administrators to focus on specific S&P or standard for mathematical practice, either identified by the teacher during the pre-conference session or by the researcher, me, or whoever wants to research next. By focusing on one S&P, it might allow for a deeper examination of what administrators notice in regards to the mathematical proficiency of students. And then I keep going on talking about the adaptation of the profile could include grade level classroom scenarios and their different views of what they see in those scenarios, and then a larger, more diverse sample size might also contribute to insight. And then finally, addressing the previously mentioned recommendations for future research with aspiring administrators would contribute to the literature in both mathematics education and educational leadership. I do have data. I didn't include that in the study of aspiring administrators because I thought that was important and valuable, that could be used in there, and to notice what they paid attention to before they actually got into the role compared to the ones who were already in the role of observing and providing feedback, right? So that is the end of the study to lead for ultimate impact and influence. That's the overall theme. That's not the name of this series, but I really do, that's the umbrella of my coaching and consulting services, or being a consultant, is helping administrators lead for ultimate impact and influence. And that can be through the avenue of content, insert content. Of course, my background is anything mathematics, science, or thinking about engineering design. But it can still work for English language arts, elective classes such as foreign language, pottery, anything with standards this can be used for. And I think that's what's so powerful about looking at a study, like this. And then also this could be leading for ultimate impact includes understanding cultural responsiveness. And it's a lot of talk around that, not cultural responsiveness as it is, but the other CRT. And it's like, if people understand the research behind certain things, I think their approach would be a lot different. So a lot of things aren't taught in preparation programs. There are a lot of, you got to pick your battles. It's like, well, do they serve a purpose? Yes, of course. But then it's like, well, what are we doing to enhance? Because it's only so much you can pack into a program of study, right? All right, so I'll leave it with that. I hope you enjoyed this series. I hope that it was eye-opening for you, and to show you that even though this original study took place years ago, it is still relevant. It is still needed for us to support our administrators, especially those who are, and I'm biased because of my background, but especially if we're wanting to have a larger focus on developing students for STEM careers. I believe everyone should have a STEM experience? I do, because it's about the approach and the understanding and the way of thinking, not so much be good at math, be good at science, become an engineer. It's not so much that. And I really want people to, especially leaders, to be able to understand and unpack that so that we can have informed teachers and informed students. So students can learn all of these great things, but then they can still go be an artist, or they could go still be like a graphics design person, or they could still go be a sanitation engineer if they want to, or garbage collector. They can do all of that with no judgment, but it's how we're helping them develop their mind. So this is not to say, oh, you must go be an engineer, be a doctor, or be a biochemist. It's not that. If they choose to do that, great. But we want to prepare them so they have options. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this series. I would love to hear from you. You can reach out to me from what we have here on the screen, drvernitaglenn-white.com/leadership. You can reach me. I'm on my email, which is info@drvernitaglenn-white.com. I'm on socials, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, at some Twitter, it's some variation of Dr. Vernita Glenn White. You will find me. But yes, I would seriously love to hear from you, whether your thoughts agree, disagree, if you have wanting to move forward, next steps, any of that. I'm just happy to present this information to you, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much. Take care.